Chairman's Rowan, I thank for being the last presenter for tonight. I feel really special. Maybe still here and still awake. What I'd like to do is just give a quick overview of what's happening, I guess, in emergency management. There's an emergency risk management agenda underway at the moment. I'm hoping that lots of you have heard about the National Strategy for Disaster Resilience. We're well aware, working in that space, that we need to input climate change data into the work we're doing, and particularly around the risk assessments, the risk treatments, learn about the adaptation options that are coming out of all the work that we've been hearing about today. We've been on a journey for about the last 8 to 10 years. I'm going to very quickly skip through this. So back in about 2002, John Howard directed that there would be a report conducted looking into disaster mitigation. And that was tabled with the Council of Australian Governments in 2003. And it identified that there was no real risk assessments being undertaken for natural disasters. So there were decisions being made, but they weren't based on evidence. And if you even look at today, or recent years, after the bushfires in 2009, throughout Australia, any remotely bushfire-prone area, the focus was on bushfire. All the resources, the research was going to that. And then we had the floods in Queensland in 2010-11. All of a sudden, there was a significant shift in focus and resourcing to floods. So the idea here is to actually let's start to look at what the risks are. Natural disasters originally was the narrow focus, and start to inform mitigation investment decisions. In that report, it talked about having a 5-year program of rigorous, systematic disaster risk assessments. It took a bit longer than that. I'm sure lots of you worked at the national level, and to get agreement on anything across a range of jurisdictions is pretty challenging. But we finally ended up with a national risk assessment framework, again focusing at that stage on natural disasters and sudden onset. So it didn't pick up on things like drought, even though that can have huge impact. It was more the floods, the bushfires and so on. We've got a national partnership agreement that's being renegotiated at the moment. That's the Commonwealth money that's been referred to today as the Natural Disaster Resilience Program. So the Emergency Management Office, I sit in SAFECOM, the Foreign Emergency Services Commission, but we have one of the lead agencies for whole of government initiatives in South Australia in the EM space. But we administer that NDRP, and we've obviously talked about some of the grants that have been allocated to climate change adaptation work. Then we have the National Emergency Risk Assessment Guidelines. They're based on ISO 31000, but they're contextualised around emergencies, and there's a couple of points about that I'll come to briefly if I still have time for others to sort of grab me in a second. And then we had a statement about disaster resilience that culminated in February 2011 when COAG endorsed the National Strategy for Disaster Resilience. So we've heard a lot about resilience today. This is about disaster resilience. It's got to be close. A lot of the impacts of climate change we've heard about today are things that we're dealing with in our space. So it rapidly became obvious to us that we needed to engage with the climate change sector, if that's how you describe yourselves. And we knew you had lots of information that we could input into the work we were doing. So again, coming back to that strategy, the point that we're at the moment is trying to understand the risks and communicate those. And I guess we're grappling with the same issues. You're trying to communicate messages about climate change. We're trying to communicate messages about risk, and there's an absolute overlap in that work. So of the 7 strategic priorities, 3 of them are around risk, and that's where a lot of the effort in South Australia is at the moment. At the state level, the State Emergency Management Committee, which is chaired by the CEO of the Department of Premier and Cabinet, and it has the Chief Officers of the Emergency Services, the same whole Commissioner, CEs of large government departments like Health, PIRSA and so on, directed that we would look at the 10 hazards that are identified in our State Emergency Management Plan. So that's flood and bushfire and animal disease, plant disease, human disease, earthquake and so on. And the intent is over through the rest of this calendar year, and we've got some resources again through that NDRP funding to work on those hazards and start to establish a state risk register. And that will inform government decision making down the line. The Emergency Management Council, which is sort of a subset of Cabinet, have been briefed on the journey we're on. So somewhere down the line, if there's $1 million sitting there to be spent, they'll actually have evidence and comparable outputs from the work we're doing, informed, hopefully, with climate change input, where they can decide, was that money best spent on fuel reduction for bushfire mitigation on Kangaroo Island, or work along the Gawler River system to reduce the impacts of flood, or community education in the lead up to a flu season when we're worried about a pandemic and so on. So that work's occurring at the state level. We've heard a couple of references to some of the work going on at zone level and zone emergency management committees. So it was great when all this work got underway that the regional committees are following the state government boundaries, as do we. We've got 12 state government regions, we've got 11 zone emergency management committees, 11 emergency management zones. Again, we thought, well, there's a whole pile of work going on out there with climate change and it's engaging local government, we need to be talking closely, particularly to people like Rowan. So we've been having ongoing dialogue and are happy to continue to do so. The way we're heading, and this has been flagged with the State Emergency Management Committee, please, brother. It says down here, you'll hear a bell ring twice. I keep wondering why it comes up to people and keeps going. It's just a friend of the police will come and go. So we've got work going on. We've been engaging with local government association and we're continuing to do that. We're hoping we're going to end up with an integrated emergency risk management system. And as you can see off to the left there, we see the work coming out of the IVAs in particular are going to be valuable inputs into our process. We looked at the first IVA and we've worked again with Rowan and we've co-funded some work that Jackie Bolston's been doing to look at how our people, which are the zone committees, are normally chaired by local government, a lot of local government representation, state government agencies, NGOs and other relevant stakeholders. At our risk assessments at the zone level, we can have as many as 20 or 30 agencies represented. So we looked at IVAs and we're looking at a way of extracting the relevant data that we can put on the table at a risk assessment workshop or a risk treatment workshop. What we would see is the work we're doing, we need to work closely together. I think the work we're doing will reinforce the work that's happening in that climate change adaptation space. So if you've got local government or a regional committee that's recommending a certain action that maybe requires dollars, if that's reinforced by the work that we've done, and there's a zone emergency management committee saying, look, yes, we support further work on the Bramble Keswick Creek system because the risk assessment we've done for flood is supporting in line with the work that's been done in this sort of space. So hopefully we're going to continue our ongoing dialogue, work closer together. There's lots of information you've got that we can just integrate and put into our process, and it's been heartening today to hear about all the work that's underway. We've been doing a lot of extreme heat risk assessments right around the state, and we've been talking in some of those forums about we need better building codes, we need better planned buildings. To hear that there's work underway already is great. So thank you for that.